Russia lost one of only two existing S-70 Ochotnik stealth drones over Ukraine. It was actually shot down. We'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Let me quickly thank the donor for the cat toilet that was on my Amazon wishlist. I have no idea who you are because it didn't come with any note whatsoever, but thank you so much. It really is very useful and easing my workload. Thank you so much for the donation. We'll switch over to what is happening in Ukraine here. Ukraine did a massive attack on Russian targets with its drones on October 3rd. At least 113 drones were used by the Ukrainians because that's the number the Russians mention as having been shot down, which shows us that this is the ballpark. The Ukrainians have hit a fuel depot in Anna in Voronezh. According to the Russians, electronic warfare managed to crash the drone, but unfortunately it fell on a depot. We know that the Russians are really unlucky when it comes to things like this. Another attack hit the Boris Globetsk airfield in Voronezh. Sukhoi 34 and 35 are stationed there, and here are satellite pictures from it. From what we see, there was something stored here in that area where the fire probably reached it, but there is no visual evidence of any serious damage or of planes having been destroyed. As you can see, they were right next to where the fire started. As of now, at least, we do not see that something serious was destroyed. Russians do almost daily attacks, no, basically daily attacks against Ukraine over the last few days. The biggest one was in the night between the 2nd and 3rd of October with 105 Shahed 136 suicide drones that the majority of them was once again shot down by the Ukrainians. We'll switch over to the developments along the front line here. We have a confirmation that the Russians have full control over Veseloye, which is southwest of Glushkovo. It's unclear as of now whether they ever have lost it. We had the Ukrainians operating roughly here somewhere in the north. We had them operating in the south and to the east of it, but whether they had taken control over Veseloye itself, I am not sure. They bypassed it in the south. That much was clear. We had visual evidence of this, but as of now we can confirm that the Russians fully control that town again. The Russians also managed to capture the town of Obuchovka. We have a geolocation here, whereas they have bypassed it to the east by now and are pushing further towards the east. This is after capturing Snagost, another town that fell back into Russian hands. That's it when it comes to developments here, to changes along the ground. I cannot confirm anything else having changed. We switch over to Kharkiv, and while fighting there has continued, again, no change that can be confirmed over the past few days. So we go directly to the eastern front here, and here we do have some changes. First of all, the most serious one is the Russians gaining 1 kilometer in the direction of the Oskil over the past few days. They have gotten even closer now and are at a minimum distance of only 2 kilometers towards the river by now. This is a painful success that the Russians managed to achieve west of Piszczany. They also managed to capture the area up here and this down here. So basically over the past few days, they more or less captured all of this here and took it over. They are about to cut the Ukrainian bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Oskil into two. Further south, the Russians managed to advance by 1.8 kilometers in Andrivka. This is to the at this point here, they managed to advance 1.8 kilometers to, no, I'm sorry, Stelmachivka. Stelmachivka is here. Here they managed to advance 1.8 kilometer to the west, north of Andrivka in this area. So roughly this here now fell to the Russians. South of it in Andrivka itself, Andrivka was taken. The Russians managed to advance 2.6 kilometers. They have taken roughly this area here, which is now under Russian control here as well. And they managed to cross the Sherebets at another point, but the Sherebets is already crossed at various points in this region. Further south, the Russians managed to advance close to Novovodiane. We have a geolocation of this where they have advanced to the west of it. This is on this is south of Andrivka. So we have the Russians advancing here, we have them advancing here, and we have them here at Novovodiane. Here in this area, as you can see, it's fairly easy to see, this is the forested area, and this is here. The Ukrainians were attacking towards this. The outcome of that attack I cannot confirm, but it proves that the Russians have entered this area, so the front line was somewhat further to the west than we have initially estimated here in the region of Novovodiane. So probably the Russians control this part more or less as well, north of the Seversky Donetsk. If we go to the area south of the Seversky Donetsk, the Russians managed to advance somewhat north of Spirne. Here we have a geolocation that you see Spirne here. They have advanced roughly up to here. Not a big advance, but they managed to crawl forward into that windbreaker tree line here further to the west over the past few days. They also managed to enter the tree line north of Vesele. Not a big change here, but we have them advancing here in this region. We have it geolocated here. Here is Vesele. And here is this part, and they managed to get in here, managed to cross over that open area, and are now in the tree line according to geolocations. Nothing has changed in Chasiv Yar, in the area of Chasiv Yar. No, I cannot confirm anything there, but further south in the region of New York and Toretsk, we have some changes. First, the Russians were recently spotted in the area south of that road here, where they have operated, and we have a fresh geolocation now that they have advanced further down the road towards the southwest here. Now they are at this point here as well, so the contested gray zone probably has to be expanded roughly like this here. Further to the west at New York, there was a engagement between a Ukrainian main battle tank and two Russian BMPs. They were destroyed, but they were destroyed up here, showing that the Russians are already operating in this area once again. So the Russians are advancing towards the north of New York. Here they have been defeated by the Ukrainians, but it shows that the area of operation is advancing further to the north. We go to the area of Pokrovsk, and here we have the Russians advancing northwest of Novorodivka, or more or less west of it, depending on where we draw the center of it. They are here at the reservoir right to the north of it. They have entered the outskirts of Lysivka. Here on the easternmost part, an advance by the Russians. Now they have entered the next town towards Pokrovsk itself. Further to the south, the Russians managed to advance further in the town of Tsukuryne. We have geolocations of them inside of the town, and they have advanced towards its north and towards its south. They also have been seen in the southern area here. They have already consolidated control. As of now, we do not know how thick the Ukrainian presence inside of Tsukuryne still is, but the town, it's probably safe to say, is about to fall fairly soon, as it's being enveloped by the Russians on both flanks, and the Ukrainians will likely have to withdraw in a short time. East of Shelane Pershe, the Russians also managed to advance. This is here. It's roughly this area. This was probably a withdrawal by the Ukrainians. As you can see, the whole area is in threat of encirclement, so we can expect the Ukrainians slowly withdrawing towards the west to shorten their front line and reduce the threat of encirclement in this area, so not too much of a surprise when it comes to the development here. Towards Kurakhove, we have the Russians in the town of Ostrivske. This is them already being up here, so they are about to reach Kurakhove if they aren't stopped to the east of it. Here they have advanced further from Hostre after taking it, and the Russians managed to clear out the pocket that was in here, but this is already a couple of days ago. Now the Russians have also advanced in the south of Maximilianivka. We have them here now, and a geolocation of it showing us that they have advanced towards the south here, the southern part of Maximilianivka. The geolocation is at this part. They are now solidly in the eastern part of Maximilianivka, again coming closer towards Kurachove directly from the east in this time. In this regard. South of Herhivka, the Russians have taken over roughly of this area here. I think some of it at least is not a fresh development. We had the Russians along this area here already roughly 2 weeks ago, but now we have the confirmations that the Ukrainians are no longer in this area. They have withdrawn or have been pushed out here. Further to the south, the Russians have been successful directly south of Katerinivka. The Russians now have full control over this area here. This now fell to the Russians, so southwest of Konstantinivka and south of Katerinivka, the Russians took over additional territory here, some tree lines where they are now having positions inside. In Vuhledar is now confirmed to be lost. We already talked about it in the last situation report, that we had Russian presence inside of Vuhledar at various points. At that point, we only had the Russians in the center and in the west and in the east, but in the northernmost part there could have theoretically been a chance of some Ukrainians still there. Now it's confirmed that the Ukrainians have withdrawn from that area and the Russians have full control over Vuhledar itself. Towards the northwest of it, we have a fresh geolocation of the Russians operating in this area as well. So the Russians have already advanced further north regarding Vuhledar itself. Whether and how much of these positions are still defended by the Ukrainians is unclear. I would expect them to fall to the Russians fairly soon as well, especially as those are again under threat of being enveloped. That was it in regards to the developments along the front line. Let's talk about the overall situation. Vuhledar has fallen. This is a painful setback for the Ukrainians. It's too big to call it a strategic defeat. This by itself will not decide the war, but it will, as we talked about a couple of times in the past, strengthen the Russian supply lines in the south here, as the railroad line here is increasingly able to be used again by the Russians to supply all of this. This is only an issue for the Ukrainians if they are strong enough to do a serious counterattack towards the south, and this at least at the moment doesn't seem to be the case anyways. So for now the situation is unpleasant and it's painful, and the Ukrainians have lost a strong point here. Vuhledar was on a hill and built up with solid high rises, allowing the Ukrainians to dominate the area around it. This is painful, but we do not see that this would lead to a collapse of the southeastern front line. The Russians have to reorganize, and so far we do not see an indication of a Ukrainian collapse in this region. The ammunition situation was one of the main reasons here. Soldiers fighting in the area were saying they were lacking artillery that could have saved the situation. But according to claims by the Ukrainians, the shell advantage is being reduced. By now it's 1 to 3 in total. That's at least according to the Ukrainians. We have to always consider, though, that from a Ukrainian point of view, it is important to do in their domestic publications to show that the situation isn't as dire, as it directly affects the morale of the population and the morale of fresh recruits, whether they expect to be sent into a meat grinder where they have no chance, or whether the Russians aren't that superior, is of importance as well. We had that a couple of times in the past, that soldiers along the front line were ridiculing their own leadership for the numbers they were saying when it comes to artillery, for instance, saying that they don't have any shells, they don't see any own shelling, but the Russians shelling them all the time, while the public, while the president, while the military leadership would say that they are close to having parity in artillery. So this has to be taken with some grain of salt. Obviously, this doesn't mean that both of it can't be true. There still can be prioritizing of certain regions which then get equal amount of artillery shells, or maybe even a local superiority, whereas at the cost of others receiving less. So this has to be seen in a context, but here we have at least the Ukrainians saying they are back to 1 to 3. And this is being somewhat confirmed by a Russian mill blogger here. We have 13th saying that the Russians are now facing shell shortage. Now, this is also a theme going throughout the war. We have Russians basically complaining most of the time that they don't have enough shells, but I guess it's also always a question of perspective, whether you can shoot all the time you want or whether you have to herald your shells to a certain degree. We see that the Russians do not have the ammunition anymore as they had in the first few months of the war. This might be true, but this doesn't necessarily mean that the Ukrainians are already superior in artillery power. What we can expect here, though, is that the destruction of the arsenals along the front line, we talked about it in past situation reports, will or might already have an effect along the front line, and this could be the reason why he's saying that they are currently facing shell hunger. Then we have a video showing that 16 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been executed by the Russians in Mykolaiv here in the Pokrovsk region. This is, by now, the Ukrainians have counted at least 93 of their own prisoners of war having been killed by the Russians. 80% of those have been killed in 2024, indicating that it's getting more rough and the discipline or the willingness to adhere to the Geneva Convention is getting smaller and smaller on the Russian side. So 93, at the very least 93 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been killed by the Russians after giving themselves up, after being hors de combat. The big news for today is what we see here. We see two planes flying next to each other and behind each other. Then we see this is a missile hitting the other one, clearly or very likely an infrared guided, and we see the other one turning away right away. So this was an intentional destruction. Initially it was said that this was a Sukhoi 25 which was shot down in a friendly fire incident, but this clearly shows that it was an intentional shoot down, and after intercepting the first flying object, the second one turns away because it clearly fulfilled its mission. By now, there are visual evidence. The visual evidence is showing, though, what came down. This is not a Sukhoi 25. It's identified, at least for now, as an S-70 Ochotnik. This is what we can see here. This is a prototype by the Russians for a loyal wingman. The estimate right now is, as it came down over Ukrainian territory, that it was tested along the front line. Command and control failed for it, and it was about to fly into Ukraine proper without any clear knowledge how and when it would come down. So it was shot down by the Russians. Now the first claims are that it was shot down by the Ukrainians themselves, that they intercepted it. As of now, I cannot fully confirm, but it seems to be the case that it was an Ochotnik. Interesting too is the clearly visible riveting here. This is not really what you would expect from a stealth plane, that the rivets and the seams of the materials are this obvious. I guess we could defend it that it's a prototype that was not meant to fly along the front line. So to test aerodynamics, to test function of systems, I guess you could do some shortcuts when it comes to actual stealth capabilities. But as said, like, this is another example, and we had the Russians using Phillips screws on their Sukhoi 57 as well in the past. So this is nothing new. Again, a painful loss that the Russians likely have suffered here. This is one of their new modern equipment that is that they use for propaganda terms. And as you can see, a massive drone that has, according to reports, air-to-ground and air-to-air capabilities, at the very least air-to-ground, and should operate with the Sukhoi 57 in the near future. Then we have the claim by the Ukrainians that 6 North Korean officers have been killed in Donetsk. They say that they were killed in a missile attack by the Ukrainians. I did not see any proof of this, so whether it's true or not, I cannot confirm, but at least the claim is that North Korean officers have been there and have been killed. But what we do know is that there was an attack on the Russian security head of security for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The initial reports are that he was killed. There are some claims that he survived heavily injured, but there was a bomb in his car that was blown up, likely through partisans, under guide of the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence. When it comes to troop generation from Russia, we have some news. The Russian opposition media, Vashnie Istory, is writing Russia wants to recruit 100 persons each from each of the 210 pre-detention centers they have. So in total, that would be 21,000 men that they intend to recruit. The interesting part, though, is that this would mean 40% of everyone in pre-trial detention would sign a contract with the Russian military and agree to be sent to the front line. This seems to be ridiculously high in number, especially as anyone in Russia should by now know that what it means to be sent towards the front line. And as we are talking about pre-trial detention centers, so where people might still have some hope of being exonerated, of being released without going to prison, that they could recruit 40% of those seems to be impossible, except with massive pressure, extortion, etc. towards this. But this is my interpretation out of this. Then we have BBC Russia. They have analyzed the ads for jobs, and according to them, they have identified 90,000 open jobs in the defense industry. The payment is 3 to 4 times as high as the average, indicating that the Russians are still struggling or continue to struggle finding enough qualified workers for the defense industry. And we have news from Russia that Ural Vagonzavod has now received a Leopard 2A6 that was captured to check it, to find out what they can learn from it. I guess in total, we have to talk about the Leopard 2A6 is a decades old system. It's still in operational use, yes, but it's not the newest of the new. In many regards, it is solid, but nothing high-tech whatsoever. For the Russians, it's more likely that they can learn something in midterm when it comes to tank construction, maybe some details about the exact details of the armament. The Russians in general should more or less know what they are facing here, but they could learn some details, for instance, how the power pack is designed to allow quick change, things like this, what the Russians usually don't do, construction methods, how to do things more efficiently or how others do it, and thus learn from it and improve their own ways. Things like this will help the Russians, surely. It would be ludicrous to say that it's pointless for the Russians to capture a main battle tank that is being used by numerous militaries that are facing them, but it's not the end of the world either. This is no top high-tech equipment that would render the own equipment useless once it's being captured. Then we have the Russians now saying that for the first time in this fall conscription cycle, they are recruiting recruits from Kherson. So now Ukrainians would be called up to serve as conscripts in the Russian armed forces. Ukrainian troop generation, we have some news as well. Zelensky is saying that the Ukraine is now capable of producing 4 million drones a year. By now they have already ordered 1.5 million. So the capacity of producing is obviously not automatically equal to the actual number being produced, as they still have to be paid for, and Ukraine needs the money to pay for that. At the same time, Zelensky said that the monthly production for the Bogdana howitzer, self-propelled howitzer, is now at 15. That's a solid 180 a year already. And they have introduced and shown to the public now a drawn variant of the Bogdana. Bogdana so far is mounted on a truck chassis, so it's mobile, but a drawn variant would be significantly cheaper, and the Ukrainians are obviously ready to produce one as well. Both of them use 155mm, so the NATO caliber, and thus can use the Western ammunition being provided to the Ukrainians. Also, the Ukrainians have tested the Him-2 again in a successful test. So far, that indicates us that the serial production has not started yet, despite claims from various sites that it's already being produced, despite claims by the Russians that they supposedly shot down Him-2 several times already. This seems to be the indication that it was wrong in this regard. Putin has also ordered the domestic offices to not do a census. This is clearly to hide losses the Russians have suffered in Ukraine, which are being kept under guard by the Russian authorities to hide the true true scale of the Russian losses. But then again, that's not much different on the Ukrainian side. They don't publicize their losses either. But that was it already from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and leave a comment what do you think about the current developments. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.